We spent quite a lot of time on the snare there.
Sure.
We still want to talk about a tom.
Yep.
Because it's a very different approach to tuning in terms of what you're aiming to achieve. So with a snare, we're going for quite a dry, short sound. For me, with a tom, what you're trying to do is get a very pure melodic tone from the drum. And this particularly is where I don't think I realized how in tune a tom could really be until I worked with some really top producers and heard what they were aiming for. And that was really inspiring to me, and now I'm very much a perfectionist about it. And I've kind of developed my own approach to tuning toms, which I later found out isn't really my own at all. Actually, I think John Bonham's tech, I saw John Ochiltree? Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking about how he tuned Bonham's toms, and it's kind of like this. Obviously I'm not doing something too wrong, I guess. So tuning a tom is so different because unlike the snare where the bottom head is really primarily there just to provide a surface for the snare wires to resonate on, with a tom you're trying to get the two heads to work together to form a single tone. And it's really helpful now to have a pitch reference to be able to do this, because my technique is to tune to a specific interval between the heads and to really get that nailed. And in my experience, when you do that, you get a really pure sound. Now, tuning a tom isn't just about finding a note for it and that being cool. It's the same thing as with a snare. The lower the tom is in its range, the more attack it's going to have relative to its sustain. And the higher you tune it, the more overtones it's going to have. Another important thing is the character of the decay of the drum. If you tune a drum a certain way, it might have a big kind of pitch dive. It will go doo, like, especially floor toms can be really prone to that. To me, that's not a sound that I really like. A certain amount of it is inevitable. If you hit a tom softly, like when I tune this tom, if you hit it softly, it's going to be a very pure sound. If you hit it hard, just because of the amount you're displacing the head, it is going to have a little period before it settles. Sometimes that can sound a lot worse in the room than it is in the microphone. In that respect, I'd say microphones are actually quite forgiving on the sound of toms. And sometimes I've made the mistake of kind of trusting what I'm hearing in a microphone only to come out into the live room after the drummer's done a great take and actually hear the tom in the room and realize it's not really in at all. Which, I mean, it's up to you whether that matters. If it sounds good on the recording, maybe you're happy to let it slide. But personally, I want the toms to be sounding optimal at all times.
Well, and I think the whole key to this is getting great core tones first before you ever put a mic on it. Because if it's good, if you really can measure it and it's good in the room, then
I mean, even last night we did a clinic locally, and a guy wanted to come up and hear your drums on the stage, like from what you were hearing, and he was amazed. He was mainly talking with me. He couldn't believe that drums could sound like that acoustically. And really, that's what you have to aim for. Maybe you can get away with it not being perfect, but when it is perfect, there is that extra, I don't even want to say 10%, I want to say anything up to 25, 30% of real polish that's going to make your production sound amazing. To the extent that, and this is kind of annoying, a lot of people think that I've been using a lot of drum samples in my mixes for the last year or so, and for the most part, if I've engineered something, I try to use none or just very little, and it's normally just on the kick drum. The toms are almost always completely natural, and because they're so in tune, they almost have that character like a perfect drum programmed machine. But to me, that's what I want to hear from a drum. And we'll go through exactly how to tune it right now, and then how to mic it and mix it, and you're going to learn all of that. So I'm going to start with the resonant head. So the resonant head is the one you don't hit, and it's thinner. And my technique is to tune the resonant head a minor third, that's 3 semitones or 3 half steps, depending on what kind of musical lingo you speak, higher than the batter head. So you're going to get an interval of a minor third. Now, when you actually hit the drum, you're not really going to hear that interval. You might just in the sustain start to hear the two heads separate, but when they're really in tune, you're going to get a single unified tone. And what I found, it depends a little bit based on the specific drum and the material of the drum and the depth of the drum. But as a general rule, if you tune the batter head 1 semitone beneath the desired pitch of the final drum, like so, I'm going to try and aim to get this drum to sound at a D. I'm going to go down by a half step. And I'm going to tune my resonant head, to that pitch. So in this case, that would be a C sharp. And then my batter head is going to be a minor third below that, so that's going to be an A sharp. We'll get to that in a second.
So is that a consistent formula then that you would try to use?
It's fairly consistent. Sometimes I've tuned like really deep power toms that are way lower than I expect them to be when they're actually tuned up. And sometimes it's not like the perfect note. But when I went through your toms earlier, actually, I mean, I don't know if we've got any mics on your toms, but if you just hit your first rack tom, once it's settled, it's do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to tune this exactly like I tuned that tom.
What note is that?
That's a D.
Okay.
And even before I get into this, in fact, I'm going to talk about the logistics of tuning different sized kits. Depending on how many toms you have, you can end up being really forced into certain ranges of drums that don't necessarily, they're maybe not optimal for the drum, but work best as an ensemble. When I've got up to 4 toms, I generally like to have the toms descending in fourths. It's a bit like the strings of a guitar, like the low 4 strings of a guitar. And actually, if you had a 7-string guitar, and you started on the D string, that would sound like those 4 toms. I don't know if you're going to hear it well enough, but if you want, you can hit through the toms, and hopefully you'll hear that.
Okay.
Yep. So the 14 is a little bit low. We'll touch that up before we do any recording, but I'm aiming for like that kind of sound as you play through the toms. If you only have 3 toms, or better yet, only 2 toms, the intervals start to matter a little bit less, and it can be more about getting the drums into their optimal ranges. To be honest, with a 4-piece kit, I find that the bigger rack tom and the bigger floor tom end up a little bit lower in the range that I would normally tune them. They don't, as an ensemble, they don't necessarily sound completely consistent in their attack, but by the time they're mixed, they're going to sound great. If I was just tuning a 12 and a 16, they would both be significantly higher. But that would force the 14 and the 10 to be way too high in their range. They'd be like jazz toms. So there is an element of compromise that's going to go into that. So anyway, D for me is a really good range for a 10-inch rack tom. To me, at that point, I know the heads are really going to be in their sweet spot. Then it's really a question of whether the heads and that pitch are going to resonate nicely with the drum. And so if it's not working, we can shift the pitch around a little bit. But I'm going to start by trying to get this to a D. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing as I did with the snare. I'm going to start with this. It's not completely slack, but it's really low. And I'm going to just try and get it even at this pitch, and then I'm going to keep applying turns until we're up at the right kind of pitch. So C sharp is going to be, this. It's kind of like an octave too low right now.
So again, the goal is to get a D. Yep. So the resonant head, you would tune a half step down to a C sharp.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, a small tom like this is very, very twitchy. It takes a very small amount of movement on a lug to yield a really big difference in pitch, so you have to be very careful. I just tuned it up a little bit from where we started, just so it was starting to make a tone. Being a thin head, it requires a little bit more tension before you can really discern a tone. Something that can help, like I'm not really hearing the pitch so much at this lug, and that might be to do with the hardware or just the head or something, is to just place a finger really lightly in the middle of the drum. Really lightly, so that you're not actually affecting the tension of the drum. So to me, there's something going on with these two. If you remember earlier, I was saying that pairs are really important, and I think I've got this one perhaps a tiny bit too tight and this one a little bit loose. So the resulting pitch is somewhere close, but I'm never going to get it right unless I kind of even out the disparity there. So I'm just going to see what I can do.
I know some other drummers that use sort of this approach of putting their thumb in the center of the drum and pulling off, so you're not getting the attack.
That's really good. That's really good once you've got a general pitch of the drum, but at this point I really want to zero in on every lug independently. But when you want to hear the pitch of the drum as a whole, like maybe right now, it's good because it doesn't excite, you don't hear the attack of the drum, you just hear the round tone. So there's some overtones, but for me, the note that I'm hearing, I guess is, it's like a G sharp. Something close to there, kind of between a G and a G sharp. So I've still got a way to go before I hit my C sharp. I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now.
Your flashlight's on.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Maybe I want to light that bit of ground up. getting close. So we're like a whole step below. Almost. It's a tiny bit flat, so this is going to be so twitchy, it's going to be kind of difficult to do, but I'm going to just use extremely small turns to try and get that final bit. Pretty much a C sharp. Now again, there are some overtones that you can hear, but the core note, the C sharp, is very, very solid. You don't want to hear it wobbling at all. To get rid of those overtones, I could apply a tiny piece of tape, but compared to a lot of toms, this is actually a very minimal amount of overtones, and from the bottom head, I'd rather not apply too much muffling. That's really going to kill the sustain of the tom. A tom is going to resonate very differently when I'm holding it than when it's placed on a mount. Invariably, any kind of mechanical mount is going to suck sustain out of the drum, so I want to try and keep as much sustain in the drum as I can. So I'm not going to apply any muffling to this if I can get away with it. Different drums are going to sound very different at different tensions. This is also a newer drum than that. It's made by Mapex and it's the same range, but between these two, they refine the bearing edge, which is the part of the hoop which the head sits on. And they've designed it in such a way that the head makes better contact around. And I found, even just in a brief amount of time tuning these toms, that it is a little bit easier. You get less overtones. They're kind of more studio ready right out of the box. But different drums all have different bearing edges, different brands prefer certain bearing edges. It's worth trying a load of drums out and figuring out what the bearing edge does for the sound. It's all about how much contact the head has, which is going to affect the tone of the head, but also the sustain of the head as well. Generally, modern drums have a sharp edge. They just have a point which the head sits on and then a 45-degree angle away. That's kind of the standard modern cut. A Gretsch kit, I think, or Yamaha recording custom kits have a steeper angle. Vintage ones tend to be very rounded over, and you get like a very overtone-heavy sound with very little sustain, so you have to put a lot more tension into them. You get more of like a kind of jazz tom sound out of that. It can still work, but it's just worth experimenting with. Anyway, so this is actually going to be a little bit different to that, but hopefully the tom's going to come out sounding pretty similar. Now, as I described, I'm going to tune this head a minor third lower. So it's going to be an A sharp.
Minor third lower than D.
It's going to be a fourth lower than the D.
And a minor third lower than the C sharp.
Not a fourth, sorry. A major third lower than the D, a minor third lower than the C sharp.
Got it.
So it's going to be
Take notes on this, everybody.
Yeah, we can go through. Just remember, go down a half step from the final pitch, which is a D, and then a minor third lower than that for the batter head. So A sharp. I'm just going to do this quickly. I've done this a couple of times already on camera, so unless people really want to see it in slow motion. So we've got an even sound. Note that there's a double ply head that's already been played a little bit, and I've got a little bit of tape on here which I'll pull off. This is a way more muffled sound. It can actually be a lot harder to tune. It's got a lot less natural sustain, even when it's in its good range, so it can be a little bit more difficult to hear what's going on. And note that I'm also kind of muffling the other head just by having it in my lap. If I'm standing, I might put it on a surface with a towel on or just on your throne so that it's not ringing. I don't want to hear the drum heads together. That can make it very difficult to really hear the pitch of each head. I will once they're both in the right kind of range, but for now, I'm going to do things completely in isolation. So right now we have D sharp, or thereabouts. So I have a fair ways to go before I hit my A sharp. So I'm just going to do that now.
Would it help to almost sing the note out loud too if you don't necessarily have the ear for it?
Yeah, definitely. And maybe if there weren't cameras and microphones on me right now, I might do that, but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, there's more connectivity as far as how you can identify a pitch if you can do it with more of your senses. I would say so. Not just listening to it, but being able to actually sing the note or hum the note really allows you to connect with it better. It's like ear training, basically. So being able to actually articulate that note and say it could help in getting better at this process.
I'd say, unfortunately, if you're a drummer and you've only ever played drums, you might not have focused so much on the melodic side of things. I find guitarists tend to make really good drum tuners because you're always messing with the tuning of your guitars, and you get really good at fine tuning, the relationships between two strings. So if you're a guitarist, you're probably going to find this a little bit easier once you get down with the mechanics of actually tuning a drum. I had another point, but I forget it. This is pretty much in A sharp. Oh, I was going to say relative pitch is also a really important skill. I've put my tuner away. I know that this is my C sharp, and I'm just going to use my ear to see if this is a minor third low. So we've got...
That's a guitar player thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to listen to the drum as a whole. Now notice it's a completely different pitch now that it's separated. We're hearing the whole sound of the tom, which is going to be really difficult to tune if I was trying to do the whole thing like that. When the kit's all set up, it can be quite difficult, but I kind of just put a hand underneath to muffle. Otherwise, it can be quite tricky to separate the heads. Floor toms are a nightmare for that. You end up on your knees kind of crawling around doing it, but you have to do what you have to do. So let's see what this sounds like. It's probably not going to be perfect, but it's going to be close. My hand is probably muffling it a little bit. I'm holding the shell. I'm going to hold it like this.
You want me to compare it with this one?
Yeah, do it. So that's a tiny bit higher. It might be that I've just tuned it a little bit differently. It might be the drum itself. Funnily enough, this is a shorter drum than that one. You might assume that a deeper drum is going to have a lower pitch. It doesn't always work that way. Every drum's a little bit different. But they're pretty consistent in sound. And you can see it really didn't, if you take out the part of me explaining, that wouldn't have taken me very long to do. There's also no muffling on this drum. It's completely just open. And if you put a microphone on that, that's going to sound like a super melodic, just doom. It's going to sound like a drum machine or something. It's great. So I would repeat that process through all of the toms, getting my desired pitches by dropping down a semitone from the desired overall pitch of the drum. So in that case, it's going to be D, A, E, B, if you're dropping down in fourths. It would be the resulting pitches of the drums. And that's pretty much it. The really good thing about tuning in this way, apart from being able to get it back, is it really flatters the sound of the drum in the microphone. As we talked about earlier with the snare, if I'm tuning the batter head too high, we start to lose that attack and we start to get a lot more overtones. Some drummers like to tune both heads to the same pitch. That hasn't worked for me. I find that I get a lot of pitch dive if I do that, and generally one or the other head is not really in a suitable range for itself. For me, because this is tuned a little bit lower, we're going to hear loads of stick attack, but because this is higher, it's going to really support the fundamental tone of the drum. Records great. And for you, it feels a little bit better. I think you prefer a slightly slacker feel on the batter head.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's much nicer to have a little bit of give, I think, than all of this rebound, because with a little give, you can sort of gauge your own movements. When there's rebound, you really have to control that movement in certain ways, especially with a tom that can be a pretty small circumference to play on as far as diameter goes. So one, your accuracy has to be really on point, especially with a lot of bounce, because you don't want the stick to go all these different ways. But I don't know, I find that for me, it's a lot easier to lay into them when there's a little bit of slack to it,
And again, this is going to work for our big drum sound that we're achieving. We're going to get both the attack from the slightly slacker batter, and we're going to get great resonance from the drum being really in tune with a higher tuned resonant head. And you'll see later when we get to actually recording, these toms are going to sound really good.